Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar in which we will deal today with the objective of achieving sustainable urban growth on the African continent. My name is Sina Schlimmer and I'm a research fellow at the Sub-Sahara Africa Center here at Ifri, the French Institute of International Relations, and I'm also the coordinator of our research activities related to urban governance in Sub-Sahara Africa. This webinar is happening exactly 1 week before the Africa-France Summit organized by the French presidency in Montpellier in France, and whereby the questions of economic ownership, culture, civil society engagement, innovation, and the role of urban questions will be key. The aim of our today's webinar is somehow to kick off some of these debates, focusing on the challenge of governing the continent's rapid urban growth. Urbanization in Africa is, of course, not a new phenomena, but let me recall some main trends and updated key figures related with urban growth. So according to the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, Africa's population is going to double between now and 2050. 2/3 of this demographic growth are going to happen in urban agglomerations, and the urban population is going to reach 1.2 billion people by 2050. And compared to other regions of the world, the African continent shows the highest urban growth rates with between 4% and 5% yearly. In several metropolitan cities, the growth rate is particularly high, and cities such as Lagos in Nigeria, Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, and Kinshasa in DRC will reach the 10 million number by 2050. Experts of international organizations have drawn the attention towards the risk of further impoverishment if this exponential growth is not regulated, for example, through adapted urban planning mechanisms. There is a risk of mushrooming informal settlements and growing slums, where the access to basic services such as water infrastructures, but also electricity and health facilities and transport are extremely limited. And recently, experts have also stressed the limited investment of both the public and the private sector in urban infrastructures, including not only transport, but also road and energy infrastructure, as well as water and sanitation systems. It is important, of course, not only to focus on the mega cities, the metropolitan areas, but also to look at urbanization that is happening in villages and small towns, because important urbanization trends can be observed in these areas, which have not yet been defined administratively as townships or municipalities, but where social and economic activities are already shifting towards urban ones and where demographic growth is also exponential. So it is important to take into consideration these areas. The challenge of urban growth in Africa has been on the international development and policy agenda for years and promoted especially by the UN Agency for Human Settlement, UN Habitat, which is also represented today, and which has been insisting on the needs to transform the risks of urban growth into opportunities for economic growth by exploiting the social, cultural, and economic potential of these cities as hubs of innovation and that also urban dwellers represent. The equal access to inclusive and sustainable cities has been defined as a sustainable development goal, the SDG number 11, and since its definition in 2015, numerous stakeholders, including the private sector, have been involved in initiatives leading towards the fulfillment of this objective and the creation of more knowledge of urbanization. Academia and research has also been very active in different disciplines such as geography, sociology, anthropology, history, and who have also been reflecting the heterogeneity and complexity of African urbanities, and also to unpack the dichotomies, for example, rich versus poor, formal versus informal, organized versus not organized. Also recently, the COVID-19 pandemic has stressed the importance of cities as hubs of innovation, where mobile applications are invented to assure, for example, mobile money transfers, to send drones with medication to remote rural areas. But it is also the pandemic that has stressed cities' reliance on the peri-urban and rural areas, especially in terms of access to food products and infrastructures. What is important to keep in mind and to see is that the international awareness is rising. International initiatives to collect quantitative and qualitative data on the spatial expansion of urban agglomerations agglomerations are increasing, such as the platform Africa Polis, which provides data on the urban agglomeration, country and regional levels in forms of tables, maps, and reports. But today, the aim of the webinar is to feed into this multi-stakeholder knowledge exchange on specific aspects of urban agglomerations. We all know that urban governance does not only involve national governments, mayors, and municipal stakeholders. Private stakeholders are involved, for example, by financing or carrying out urban infrastructure projects. International organizations develop norms for so-called inclusive urban governance, and NGOs and other civil society stakeholders carry out projects such as slum upgrading initiatives, and more models are developed based on mobile phone applications and other technologies. So today, the discussion focuses on the role of small and medium-sized enterprises and local entrepreneurs in urban governance, for example, by developing innovative products based on new technologies and fit-for-purpose solutions. We thereby want to focus on three main sectors where experiences and progress in these fields were made, namely transport and mobilities, energy, and land. And I'm extremely happy today that three experts of these sectors have accepted to join this event and so to share their theoretical and practical experience. So first of all, there is Hugo Le Picard. He is an economist and research fellow here at the Center for Energy and Climate of Ifri, and he also teaches microeconomics at Paris Dauphine University. His research mainly focuses on the issues of energy poverty, electricity access, and the financing of electricity infrastructures in sub-Saharan Africa. He has published several papers, for instance, on digital technologies for centralized electricity systems. Then our second speaker, Teddy Delaunay, is working at the French Croix Rouge Mobilité, the Red Cross program, and a specialist on urban transport. In his PhD in urban development, he has assessed the integration of carpooling into French transport systems. And then his postdoc led him towards East Africa, where he studied new business models of mobility. In Uganda and Kenya, he has done research on the use of mobile phones in city transportation and their effect on everyday mobility practices. And some of his papers on Kenya also focus on the contribution of private transport offers to transport policies. And last but not least, we are happy to have Anthony Lamba, who will be addressing the land sector. Anthony is a chief technical advisor at UN Habitat, working for the Afghanistan office, but currently based in Nairobi. He is a trained land surveyor and holds a master in geoinformation management. He has extensive theoretical and practical knowledge about urban land, and he has worked with the Kenyan ministry for 9 years before joining UN Habitat 15 years ago. He has been involved in urban governance and land policies, especially in conflict-affected areas in Somalia, South Sudan, Liberia, and lately also Afghanistan. Without further delay, let's move on to our three presentations. After the three presentations and short round of feedback from my side, we will have a Q&A session during which you can all ask your questions to the presenters in the Q&A box. Therefore, yeah, please write your questions very clearly and as concise as possible in the box. I will now give the floor to Teddy Delaunay. A couple of words to the role of transport in the urban governance sector. So as we all know, we know the pictures of big African cities being congested and polluted. And of course, transport plays a crucial role in shaping the face of a city, of an urban agglomeration. And also with the arrival of Uber and Uber-like offers, the picture of cities changes again. So Teddy is going to take us through different cities and different transport offers and how they shape transport policies in different East African countries. Thanks a lot. And now I'm giving the floor to Teddy.
Sorry, thank you very much, Tina. Can you see my screen? Hello?
Yes, we do.
Yes, you do? Okay. So, hi everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank a lot Sina Schlimler and the French Institute of International Relations for inviting me today. So my name is Teddy Delaunay. I'm a project manager for the Red Cross Mobility Program. I'm also an associate researcher at the City Transport Mobility Lab, where I did my PhD. I worked in Kenya in 2009 and 2020 at the French Institute of Research in Africa, and then as a cooperation officer for the French association CODATU, where I worked on the regulation of paratransit services, and more specifically on the regulation of e-hailing, ride-hailing services in Kenya and in Cameroon. So the topic of my presentation today is to explain what are the different opportunities, how the development of these ride-hailing services represent several opportunities to improve the regulation of the paratransit sectors, and to improve also the service quality of mobility services in many different African countries, but also in low development countries more broadly. My presentation is structured as follows. First, I will introduce you what is a paratransit sector. I'll try to briefly describe how it is regulated and what are the main negative externalities they are creating these services. And then I will introduce to you how the ride-hailing service development of ride-hailing services, with the focus on Douala and Nairobi, represent a lever to improve the regulation, the service quality of mobility services in these two cities. And I will conclude my presentation by introducing a new pathway to explore a new governance scheme between these ride-hailing companies and public authorities. First of all, what is a paratransit sector? So maybe you can ask me later, but paratransit, we can call it sometimes informal transit or artisanal transit services. So it's different kind of reality of notions, but what is important to know is that paratransit services represent a wide range of different type of operators and services. You have operators with midbus, buses, midbus, minibuses, or taxis, collective taxis. But you have also more tailor-made services such as a motorcycle taxi, or ride-hailing services, or even tuk-tuk. This paratransit sector emerged at the beginning of the 20th century in the context of informality, and it developed in a context of self-regulation. I mean, they were not allowed to operate, but they were often tolerated because they were giving access to all the urban dwellers to employment and services and housing. So they have been developing in an informal way, but tolerated by the local government. This informality has led to a development of the sector in form of liberal and with a logic of a competitive market and a profit-oriented logic, because there is no regulation of the sector. There is no proper regulation of the market at the beginning, so they have been developing there are not barriers to market entry, so every entrepreneurs could enter into the market and start offering the services with the purpose of profit before all. And this absence of regulation and this logic of this profit-oriented logic has created many negative externalities. So that's why in many countries, the government have started to try to regulate these sectors at the early 90s. And this regulation is based on two main fields. First, a quantitative regulation, which aims at create barriers to market entry. The idea is to to control the number of drivers who are allowed to operate on the territory, and to reduce the competition existing between all these operators for the market. And you have also on the other side, on the other hand, a qualitative regulation that aims at to impose norms and quality of service standards, such as, for example, types of vehicles, capacity, equipment like safety equipment, or for example, speed limit, seat belt. You have also government try to impose, for example, routes or schedules, or the respect of fares or tariffs. So all kind of qualitative regulation and quantitative regulation that aims at improving also on one hand the quality of service, and on the other hand reduce the competition between all the operators. But what you can observe in many African country is that this regulation, even if it exists, is too often inadequate or not enforced. And the reason why this regulation is not enforced or inadequate, first of all, it's because there is too often a strong, huge institutional fragmentation. I mean that the relevant authority are often too numerous and poorly coordinated. For example, in Nairobi, you have the national state, the NTSA, the National Transport Safety Authority, which is granted a transport license, public services license to the operator to allow them to operate. But you have also the city county, for example, of Nairobi, which is also imposing PSV license to the operators. And sometimes this license are not, the requirement to get this license are not the same, and sometimes they are contradictory. For example, the prices could be different, the routes imposed can be different, or the station where the buses have to stop can be different. So sometimes there are some contradiction between the institution, and there is a lack of coordination. Also, a big issue is a lack of financial resources. Many of, as the sector is mainly informal, it is quite complicated for the administration to collect taxes. And as a result, the third point is the limit of the regulation of the sector, is that the administration often has an income-based logic in the way they regulate the system. For example, each license granted to an operator represents an additional source of revenue for the administration. So, for example, in Nairobi, the administration, the National Transport Safety Authority, tend to grant as much as possible license to the operators, because each license represents an additional source of revenue. So, as a result, we can say that there is almost a free access to the market. Either operators operate declared with a license, but they are quite easy to get. Either they are informal and they don't have any license, but the administration don't have the possibility to enforce and respect and make them respect the law. So as a result, you have to this free access to the market. You have an uncontrolled supply of the transport services, which result in a huge competition between all the operators on the market, and a very low non-compliance with service quality standards. I will now that the framework is in place, I will introduce to you two case studies in Douala and Nairobi to introduce to you how the development of ride-hailing services represents an opportunity to improve the situation, both in terms of regulation and in terms of service quality. So in Douala, for example, motor taxi drivers represent the only solution available for urban dwellers, the only mobility solution for urban dwellers. In Douala, 60% of the motorized trips are done thanks to motor taxi services. So they play an important role for the local economy, but they are also at the origin of many external negative externalities. What is important to know is that almost the totality of motor taxi drivers are working undeclared and without the authorization. They have no driving license, they have no insurance, they have no vehicle registration, no number plates, and they have no operating license, like public services vehicles license. They have no safety equipment such as gloves or helmet. They are not trained. They are working in a very precarious situation because the vast majority of them are not owner of their own vehicles. They have to rent it to an owners, and they have to pay every day a rent. So they have what we call a target system. They have to pay every day or every week a rent, and in order to get revenues, they have to work long hours and to get as much possible as customers as much as possible. So this pushes them to adapt risky and violent, sometimes violent behaviors, and to work in a situation of stress and tightness. In front of that, the public authority of Douala are not able to regulate both quantitatively or qualitatively the sector. Because of lack of financial and technical means, but also because of a lack of coordination between the national and local government. And as a result, there is a real absence of barriers to market and try. This leads to a competition, an important competition between drivers, as I already told you. And also what is important to know is that drivers, as they are not declared, or they are working without any registration, and without any papers, they don't have any ID, for example, sometimes, and no driver license. They operate in a situation of impunity. I mean, if they are involved in an accident, for example, it's very hard for the administration to identify them and sanction them. And this is a huge problem because the sector is responsible for around 70% of road accidents. So in this context, the development of e-hailing app in Douala, but also in Nairobi, represents an opportunity to improve the regulation of the system. This app has been since around 10 years with the development of the internet access and mobile internet access, the development of e-hailing or ride-hailing services in Africa has been very important. In 2017 already, more than 60 companies were registered on the African continent. And we can observe that we have both the development of major international apps such as Uber, Bolt, also French for example, each, or Swivel is an Egyptian one. But you have these major international apps, and you have also local entrepreneurs developing more locally developed apps. For example, you have Safe Boda in Uganda, you have Gozem in Togo, you have Teleman in Mali, B in Cameroon. And this app are developing a service based on the they are trying to develop a services, I would say like premium services to attract more customers. Yes, because what they want to offer is not a local services, but just to offer like an access to a more secure, more safe system, safe services with requirement that with the guarantee that the driver is trained, he has a driver license, he has a good vehicles, and he is respecting the law, and these services are meeting a huge demand. I did some research in Nairobi, for example, on the development of taxi services, Uber, Taxify, Bolt services in Nairobi, and these figures show you often, according to the social group, people are using these services. And what we can see on these figures is that even the poor people, people who are earning less than 25,000 Kenyan shilling per month, so around $250 per month, are using on a regular basis this taxi service, this e-hailing services. As you can see, around 40% of people earning between 10,000 and 25,000 Kenyan shilling state that they use on occasionally or regularly these services. And this is the case because sometimes they just don't have the choice. The public transit services existing are not sometimes available, or sometimes they are too expensive because if you have to take several buses in order to go where you want to go, you have to pay several tickets. And that's why sometimes if you share a taxi, a Uber, and you are going directly to your destination, the journey can be shorter, and the trip can be less expensive. So it's not, what I would say this result is that ride-hailing services are not only a luxury good, they are a luxury good in a way, but they are a necessity because in the context of huge car dependency, even the poor, the low-income group, social groups need some time to access to this kind of services. So these services, they are developing and they are meeting a huge demand. They are developing without help of the local government. And as I told you already, they are trying to develop a premium services. So they are trying to improve the situation of the driver and the service. Notably, they are proposing to the driver and to granting to the customers that the drivers, they are doing like technical inspection of the vehicles. They are offering training to their drivers. They guarantee that their drivers, they have an operating license, they have protective equipment such as helmet, gloves, etc. They have sometimes insurance, sometimes mutual funds. Sometimes they offer even like social security or in case of illness or in case of accident. They can also offer like legal helps in case of control or police harassment. And sometimes some of them are trying to develop the electric vehicles on the territory to reduce the pollution. So this new services, these new companies are developing a system that is going from in the way that it can help to professionalize this sector, improve the service quality, and so even if they add a layer to an already complex system, they represent an opportunity for the local government to create a more stable system and to take advantage. For the local governments, they could take advantage of this new company in order to improve more broadly the system, the patron system. And I think it's very important that local government and national government try to tend to regulate this new company, this new e-hailing company. First of all, because these companies are private and they are also profit-oriented. They have also a profit-oriented logic when they are developing in all the countries, even in Western countries. We can see that they contribute to an increase in terms of transport supply and in an unregulated way. So they can contribute to strengthening competition between the operators, and to reduce and to contribute to the precariousness of the drivers if they are too numerous and in competition on a small market. So it's important that public authority regulate the number of licenses they grant, and it is also important to regulate the system, because it is possible that a company could get a monopoly, private monopoly on a local territory. And if, for example, Uber get the winner take all, you know, that in this market you have often this kind of winner take all logic. If a private monopoly would be established, it would be an issue for example, the users would be dependent of this solution in case of rising prices, and also, of course, for the drivers, if, for example, the commission imposed to the driver were raised by the e-hailing company.
Teddy, I'd kindly ask you to conclude if possible.
Okay,
Thank you.
This is the conclusion. But what is interesting with these ride-hailing companies is that they are facing many issues, and they need to secure their investment because it takes a lot of money and time to train the driver, guarantee good vehicles, and to provide the vehicles, and etc. So what these companies are trying to do currently is they are trying to stand as partner for local authorities. Some of them are even positioning themselves as an extension of the authorities. For example, GoZem is exploring the opportunity to manage the public service vehicle license insurance. I mean that they could do, as for example in Douala, the local government is not able to manage the license insurance system. GoZem is trying to offering to do it for them. You have also, for example, other partnership. Uber in Nairobi is working with the National Transport Safety Authority on the management of traffic jam in Nairobi. In order to reduce the traffic jam, they are paying people in the street who are helping the police to reduce and to manage traffic. And what we could imagine, and what some of them are trying to do and to negotiate with local government, is to imagine a partnership where, for example, the municipality could guarantee to the ride-hailing company an exclusive right to operate, and in counterpart, the company would have to respect a few, for example, to respect tariff schedules, or respect fares, or engage or make sure that the driver are trained, have a license, have a social security, have good working condition, or also, for example, transmit their data to the municipality to help them to plan the development of the city, also to in the perspective of tax collection. So what we can imagine is that we could imagine that the good pathway would be the implementation of kind of public partnership between these ride-hailing companies and the local government. For example, they could issue a call for tenders, and they will put this company in competition. Like it could be a local company or international companies, and they will put it in competition on the market, and not for the, they will compete for the market and no longer for them on the market. And it could help to create this new framework, this new governance framework, to get advantage of this new company who are already trying to do this. And we can observe that this is happening in Douala, in Kampala, in Uganda. For example, Kampala has impose to all the taxi drivers to be registered on a ride-hailing company in order to get the right to operate. And with Coda 2, the session I was working for before, we are working also with the World Bank. They are working with the World Bank to create this kind of private, public-private partnership with the municipality of Douala and to create and to issue a call for tenders in the next 3 years. So yes, sorry for the time for the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Teddy, for this informative presentation. It's in fact super interesting to see these very concrete negotiations between the private and the public sector of norms shaping the transport system and how the private sector also contributes to formalizing so-called informal activities. So we are now moving without further waiting to another policy sector of urban governance and through a more economic analysis of urbanization trends, because Hugo de Picard is now going to take us through the challenges of providing sustainable access to electricity to a growing urban population on the continent. It is estimated that around 80% of urban dwellers in sub-Saharan Africa are on the grids, as the specialists say, but his presentation will show us that the context is a bit more complex. It is important to keep in mind that a functioning electrical grid is a key condition for industrialization and more globally for economic growth. Hugo is going to show us that the approach of a centralized electrical grid is limited and that more fragmented and decentralized systems are probably more realistic. They promote the activity of small and medium scale industrialization rather than large scale industrialization. Hugo, the floor is yours.
Hi everyone, thank you very much, Sina, for the very kind introduction. Can you see my screen, my slides? Okay, great. So I think the main point of my presentation is that today, in light of the rapid urbanization and the difficulties that the electricity network have in expanding at the same rate, consumers have an incentive to use autonomous systems for their electricity consumption. It asks very serious questions about the future of the centralized network and what it will look like in the region in the coming decades. As we will see, the electricity sector might be becoming more and more decentralized, and that even in densely populated urban and peri-urban areas that are covered by the main grid today. This will in turn will have consequences on the development of network infrastructures, on centralized capacities market, and on the regional markets that are starting to develop in the region. I think if we look back in time, mainly due to the vastness of African countries and the importance of the population living in rural areas, it has been and it is still too costly for the central network alone to electrify the entire population. In the past decade, however, the rapid development of mobile telephony and payment systems, as well as the falling cost of solar panels, have led to a paradigm change on access to electricity and made grid extension one option amongst many others for the electrification of the continent. So depending on the existing grid and population density, electrification of Africa is now seen as a combination of these three main options. Grid extension for urban areas located near existing grid infrastructures, mini grids for densely populated areas far from the grid, and individual solar home system for sparsely populated areas. But I think we should be very careful with the term access to electricity, and it should be viewed with caution, as this, even when a consumer lives in an urban areas and is connected to the grid, it doesn't necessarily mean that the consumer has access to a reliable source of electricity, nor sufficient access or an affordable access. And in fact, power cuts due to the poor condition of grids are very common. For example, according to the World Bank, Nigeria is an extreme case with more than 32 power outages per month on average, and each lasting also an average of 12 hours. It literally represents 16 full days without electricity every month. And it's not only power cuts, but as you can see on the graph below on the left, which is from a database I'm working on at the moment, you can see that even when the grid is working, the voltage, this is the voltage of the network from the time of the day, it can be also very volatile. And when it drops significantly, as you can see here, it can cause very serious damage to companies' equipment. As a consequence of this unreliability of power supply, it has a significant negative effect on economies, and it represents, on average, a cost from 1 to 5% of GDP, depending on the country. For Nigeria, the IMF estimated that it costed the economy of the country about $29 billion each year. So to take into account these disparities in access to energy, the World Bank has set up an indicator, which is called the multi-tier framework, which ranges from tier 0, which corresponds to a quasi-null access, to tier 5, which equates to full access to electricity, as the one we can have in industrialized countries. So as a result, you have a colossal need for investment today, which necessarily depend on the levels of electricity access that you want to provide to the population. For a level access 5, which corresponds to full access to electricity, you would need about $120 billion each year until 2040, and half of which in network infrastructure and not only in generation. But in 2019, only $25 billion was invested in generation and $10 billion in networks infrastructures throughout all Africa and from all sources. So therefore, you have a colossal need for investment, and therefore private funding needs to be fully involved. However, this funding is slow to materialize in sufficient amounts because of the high risks that are associated with investment in the continent power sectors. Most national electricity utilities in sub-Saharan Africa are not financially viable and are considered as unreliable partners by project developers, and thus limiting private sector investment that is held to be particularly risky. This difficult financial situation, which applies to almost all electricity utilities in sub-Saharan Africa, besides constraining investments, also jeopardizes the survival of existing power sectors. As you can see on the left graph, which represents the supply cost of electricity and revenue collected in dollars per kilowatt-hour billed, all public electricity companies in sub-Saharan countries are in deficit, with the exception of 3 countries, Uganda, Seychelles, and Niger. It literally means that for every kilowatt hour that is provided to the consumer, the revenues that are linked to the sale of electricity is not covered. So these deficits can be explained by pricing levels that are too low in view of the electricity service cost, but also by the significant technical and non-technical losses on the transmission and distribution networks. As you can see on the right graph here, you see the transmission losses in a selection of countries on the right graph. Most of them are way above the international standard of 10%, which is the orange line that you can see here. But these deficits can also be explained by the difficulties in recovering the revenues from the sale of electricity and overstaffing in public enterprises. Consequently, you have a vicious circle that is gradually taking shape in many countries. So basically, the main effect of the poor financial situation of these companies is reduced investment in maintenance, notably high voltage lane and medium and low voltage lane, that in turn perpetuates obsolete grids. The quality of the service tends to worsen, and you have chronic power cuts, as we saw in Nigeria and in other countries. You have 32 power cuts per month in some countries. So given this deterioration, an increasing number of customers refuse to pay for services that have become substandard, and this contributes to further revenue losses for electricity utilities. And so you have a lot of unpaid bills and automation of consumers. This in turn reduces the share of financing that are allocated to the maintenance of facilities, and the quality of services will worsen and so on. But if you want to have a large-scale development of centralized renewable capacities in sub-Saharan Africa, it is imperative that the sector's finances improve. But so, in light of the growing urban population, as Sina shown in her presentation, her introduction, and the grid difficulty in expanding at the same rate and to be reliable, people and businesses increasingly have an incentive to use additional ways to generate electricity. And this, especially when the network is unreliable. And it's very common that consumers use several means to remedy the unreliability of the network and to optimize the electricity expenses. As you can see on the right graph, you have a very clear correlation between network and reliability. So this is in red number of electrical outages in a typical month in the country, and the percentage of firms that own or share a generator. And this is an underlying trend that is and will have a broader impact on the sector's finances and therefore on its development. And of course, these investments in autonomous electricity generation capacities in areas that are covered by the grid is further facilitated by urban populations' higher purchasing power in comparison to rural areas. Today, auxiliary generators, so diesel generators, are still the preferred means for dealing with grid failures. And again, I think the Nigerian case is a very striking one and very representative. In Nigeria, the aggregated installed capacity of diesel generators in the countries is estimated to be around 10 to 15 gigawatts, 2 or 3 times the available capacities that you have on the central grid, which was around 6 gigawatts for 2019, according to the regulator. So you actually have 2 to 3 times more decentralized systems that you have centralized capacity in the country already. So there is definitely a market for decentralized systems also in areas that are covered by the grid, and notably amongst businesses and consumers that want to protect themselves from grid unreliability and voltage volatility. But these trends today are also opening up a new market, which is for decentralized solar in urban areas in sub-Saharan Africa. And while we know that the market for solar home system in rural areas has grown a lot in the past years, the penetration of decentralized solar systems in urban areas in sub-Saharan Africa has not been really covered yet. So what we did is at Ifri, we've developed a new method using artificial intelligence and more specifically deep learning applied to computer vision and satellite imagery to estimate the penetration of the solar market in cities in sub-Saharan Africa. And basically, this maps shows basically all the installed decentralized solar capacity that you have in the center of sub-Saharan cities such as Bamako, Dakar, Accra, etc. And we've covered most of the main sub-Saharan capitals, and there will be shortly both a publication where we present the method and an analysis of the results found by this study. So keep in touch if you are interested. So basically what this says is that maybe the next biggest market in Africa for solar home systems is not necessarily in rural areas, how we thought at the beginning, but maybe also in cities where the grid is pretty unreliable. It could mean that besides the 600 million sub-Saharan without access to electricity, there are potential solar home system customers. There is a further 700 million new clients in urban areas who have access to electricity, but who are dealing with an unreliable network. And for a selection of 13 cities, we found that there were about 200 megawatts of aggregated decentralized capacity in these sub-Saharan cities. It's a lower bound estimation because we had to restrict ourselves to on the surface covered due to the very high variability that we have in the quality of satellite imagery, and sometimes the resolution is not high enough to distinguish a solar panel. So even if it's marginal compared to the 14 gigawatts of diesel generators that you have in Nigeria, it's definitely the beginning, and it's not marginal in comparison to what you have in centralized solar capacities. For example, if you take sub-Saharan Africa and you exclude South Africa, which is a peculiar case, you have about 2 gigawatts of solar centralized capacities that are installed in sub-Saharan Africa. So what we found, the 200 megawatts, which is a lower bound estimation of the decentralized capacities in sub-Saharan cities, it represents already about 10% of the total solar installed capacities on the network. So it has a question about what will be the medium and long-term trends of these new development. I think first that the development of electricity sectors in sub-Saharan Africa will follow its own path, a path that will definitely be very different from every other continent of the world, and which will be between decentralized and centralized electricity systems, even in urban areas. The development of this market will really depend on the evolution of demand for electricity in sub-Saharan cities, and especially in the capacity of the central network of each country to develop accordingly. So if we look at a long-term trend, as it's already been stated by Sina, Africa is experiencing a strong demographic growth. The continent is projected to have more than 2.1 billion inhabitants in 2050 against 1.1 billion today. And again, it's projected to have 60% of its overall population in cities by the middle of the century. So it would mean that in less than 30 years, you will have the equivalent of all the inhabitants that you have in sub-Saharan Africa today, but which will be located in the cities. So about 1.1, 1.2 billion inhabitants in the cities. So of course, with this insight, we expect the demand to grow on the centralized network. But if the quality of electricity supply is not improved, there will be reducing income from the sale of electricity to consumers, because the consumers will be less dependent on the central grid and more likely to refuse to pay or dispute their invoice. It's something we see in Nigeria, for example, with diesel generators. Am I too long, Sina? It's okay. Okay. However, for decentralized solar in urban areas, the econometric analysis that we conducted shows that it's mainly lucrative consumers that tend to have a decentralized solar system, and that even in areas where the grid is reliable. And this therefore implies that lucrative consumers, if they are not totally moving from the, away from the grid, are consuming less on the centralized network, which necessarily implies also a loss of revenue for the utilities. And this will have consequences on the development of the central grid. In Nigeria, for example, you have, Nigeria is one of the 3 countries where the tariffs and the revenues collected per kilowatt-hour bill cover the cost of electricity, and I mean cost of generation and supply of electricity to the end consumers. But today, only about 15% of the population has an access to electricity, and most of them are the wealthier segment of the population located in cities. So they are lucrative consumers. And deploying the grid to new consumers will necessarily mean to connect less lucrative consumers for the distribution utilities, and some of which will consume electricity at subsidized tariffs. So if we rely only on cross-subsidization from wealthier consumers to the poorest ones to ensure the financial viability of the system, having the most lucrative consumers moving away from the grid could endanger the future financial viability of utilities, and therefore the future development of the network. So it really asks the question about the future role of utilities today. And if we extrapolate, depending on the country, different models could appear. Some utilities that are in a very dire financial situation could get close to disappear, or utilities could manage to find ways to fully integrate those new use in the system, notably through the use, for example, of smart grid technologies, for example, in places where the network is strong and reliable, such as Togos. What is more probable is that you will have a hybrid model emerging, somewhere between the two, where you will have a reliable and modern electricity sector in the central urban areas, and hybridization of electricity use and partial withdrawal of utilities in weak grid areas. Due again to the very important demographic growth and rapid urbanization, it is something, it is an underlying trend that will shape the development of the network. And it will really depend on the ability of the country's utilities to adapt to these new developments, and that in context of the new technologies emerging in telecommunication technologies, that could definitely help. One example amongst others is, for example, large-scale storage, which can improve the quality of grid electricity. I think I've been a bit too long in my presentation, so I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Hugo. Your presentation stresses, in fact, the importance of the energy sector for broader economic development, but energy infrastructures are therefore needed. Experts stress the infrastructure financing gap, which is higher in sub-Saharan Africa than in other regions of the world. And this actually draws our attention to the source of this financial resources and the unsustainable reliance sometimes on external sources and sources of donors. So this is the topic that we're going to address now through the last presentation provided by Anthony Lamba. Research and practitioners have in fact shown that local sources of finance are more sustainable funding approaches than only external funded projects, which come more often as parachutes and standalone projects. So they would create more accountability and also an opportunity for local governments to be considered as democratic political institutions. They can create a revenue stream and promote accelerated local investment. They can also include urban projects into the broader urban fabric and related sectors into policies such as transport and land, as we're going to see now in Anthony's presentation. Anthony, the floor is yours. Anthony, we can't hear you yet.
You can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about land-based financing for urban development. I'm going to give examples of how this has been done in several countries in Africa, what the levers for success have been, and then I will move on to an actual program that we are delivering at UN Habitat in one country in Africa and in another country in Central Asia, which is in the same program. So the rationale behind my discussion, and this should be fairly known to all of us, the rationale for land-based financing is that governments, because they either own land or lease land or put investments into land, then governments use LBF tools, land-based financing tools or instruments, to get revenue from the users of the land. They try to do this as efficiently as possible and as equitably as possible to pay for the public's for the services that the public expect from government. This can be done at central level and at decentralized level. We see different levels of decentralization in different African countries. So as I proceed, think about local authority at some point in the decentralization continuum, as I call it, which runs from a totally decentralized local government, which raises its own funds and gets nothing from the central government, to a local government that gets most of its resources in terms of transfers from the central government to run its affairs. I'll be referring to the social contract, which sits at the center of this rationale. And the social contract, it's called different things in different countries, but the idea is that in exchange for government providing acceptable standard of services and an effort to improve these services, then residents who enjoy those services are more inclined to pay for those services. So that is what the social contract is, and it sits at the center of the rationale for land-based financing. I'll go through very quickly three large instruments for land-based financing. I'm getting this from a publication from UN Habitat that we did in 2016. So the first one is land value sharing. I'll not read everything, I'll just give you an idea. So the idea for the first set of instruments is that the government either owns or leases out to proprietors of land, or invests public money into land and improves its value. And therefore, the government is well placed to recoup some of that investment and redistribute it to other residents or other citizens. That is the theme for land value sharing. That is what it's about. There are different ways government can do this. It can do this by levying tax. It can do this by levying fees. In other places, they're called municipal charges, etc. Okay, the second large area of land-based instruments is development-based instruments. So these are those instruments where when a developer or an individual proprietor of land wants to develop their property, subdivide it, or put up buildings, etc., then there is a charge that is levied to them by the government, either at central level or at decentralized level, which they have to pay for that development to go forward. There are others that I will not go into, like land pooling or land readjustments. Many of us have heard about this, or requests for proposals. In all these tools, the government is basically recouping what it has invested in land to give the rights for people who want to develop their land. Third area is community-led instruments like community land trusts and land cooperatives. This is also one way of government either to get revenue or to save money they would have spent. So it can go either way, okay, to develop land. I just give two of the most popular tools that we see in African countries: community land trusts and land cooperatives. So as I proceed, remember these three as the most common ways that governments at central or lower levels get or make revenue in order to give services. I'll give a very quick rundown of examples of OSR reforms. This is on-source revenue reform projects in Africa. This is some of the ways which governments, either by themselves or with external support, has tried to focus on one or more areas of the land-based financing tools to increase revenue for local authorities to provide services. Okay, so these are examples that I got from a literature review done by Professor William McCluskey. He is actually part of the project that I'll talk about a little bit later. So I'm working with him in that project. So one is the application of GIS to improve revenue mobilization. Okay, so we see in Ethiopia a wide range or scaled up web-enabled GIS-based property tax system that is used in many cities to make sure that properties are captured in a GIS system, and therefore it increases the base for taxation. In Rwanda, we see improvements in property registration, where they have registered digitally 11 million parcels in the country in different municipalities. Okay, that again improves or expands the tax base from which they can collect revenue. Third one in Sierra Leone, introduction of a simplified valuation and assessment. There are many countries in Africa and elsewhere where the valuation and assessment of tax itself takes too much time of the taxation authority, and then it ends up being inefficient. So they've simplified this assessment approach in some city councils in Sierra Leone. In Kenya, there is a very, very famous residents association called Karen Langata District Association, who have managed to go to court to argue that the efficiency of services in that part of Nairobi is not up to standard, and therefore they'll do it themselves, and they can remit the money to the authority by themselves, by this district association. And I give a last example there from Nigeria, where a certain amount of on-source revenue is earmarked to be used for certain infrastructure and service projects in Lagos State. I'll move on to what we see. This again you find in literature review and in many practical cases that we've dealt with, that the levers for success in an LBF system, a land-based financing system, is the taxation base. If you're collecting tax or other revenues from only 10% of all eligible properties, you can expect to collect only so much revenue. So the taxation base is important. It must be defined. It must be clear who are exempted from paying the tax. The assessment and the rates must be clear and transparent, so that even the paying public knows how much is expected of them and how it's calculated. And there must be a method to raise objections or to appeal. Okay. Second lever of success is the administration itself. This is where we see that technology helps many local authorities to collect more revenue in a more efficient way. And administration, I'll just mention, in African countries, there are 3 areas which determine whether a tax administration system is successful. One is the volume of base and efficiency of collection. Okay, and this has something to do with the legal and regulatory framework, and also the responsibility and authority of the local authority. Second is how much of the how much of the revenue that's actually collected is spent on development. So much of that translates into development spending per capita, if you like. There are authorities which collect a certain amount, but spend 90%, in some cases, even more than 100% of the amount collected on the business of collecting the revenues, okay? In the collection, they spend more than they collect. And the third one is going back to the social contract, is the awareness and the education of the paying public. Do they know they're paying for? What the revenues are spent on? And number 3, are the services that are delivered by the local authorities at the acceptable levels or standards. I'll go to the compliance and enforcement. So compliance and enforcement is a factor of the social contract I talked about. And the important things there are, number 1, how much time and effort is required to pay tax. That means the transaction cost of the paying public. How easy or how user-friendly is the payment system or the collection system on the side of the authority. And number 3, how fair and equitable is the whole process. So these are the things that go into determining the levels of compliance. I'll now go into the project that we are actually delivering right now. As I said, we are doing that in one country in Africa, Somalia, and another country in Central Asia. I know this webinar is about Africa, but I'll give examples also from Afghanistan, because I have a colleague in Somalia who's taking care of the Somalia project, and I'm taking care of the Afghanistan project. But remember, these are projects being delivered in tandem, in alignment, and we are sharing lessons from Somalia and Afghanistan inside this project, and trying to make sure that what we are applying in the 2 countries learn from each other. So our experiences learning from each other is proving to be very useful. Now, in this project, which is funded by the EU and NORAD, we try to ensure that, the process that we followed was first to analyze the situation in the 2 countries, what the policies are in terms of assessment and rates, and how the administration of land-based financing looks like. So that is the actual situation on the ground. Then we move to a strategic or diagnostic assessment in which we identify the problems of the land-based financing administration in Somalia and in Afghanistan. We learn the lessons of the last 3 or 4 years. What has that system learned in terms of what is working for them, what's not working for them, and then we suggest interventions and priority actions to be funded by this program, so that the land-based financing systems in these 2 countries are improved. Then we put together an implementation plan, which includes policy and administration reforms, which is what we are actually implementing right now in the projects in these 2 countries. So there are particular areas that we zeroed in on in the both countries, okay, in different ways, but in both countries, where we thought they would reap maximum returns in terms of the outcome of this project. So one was to expand the tax base. As simple as it might sound, it's not that easy, but we found out that in Afghanistan, for example, most municipalities were getting what they call municipal charges from less than 40% of eligible properties. So first thing is we survey and register properties. We've surveyed and registered close to 1 million properties in 3 years in 12 cities. Okay, so these properties now are on the books of the municipalities, in these 12 municipalities. So you can decide which ones are exempted and which ones you're getting tax from. And that's how we expand the tax base. So down there, you see that we developed a geo database. I'll talk about it a bit later, with all the properties in each of these cities. So this is a city-wide survey and puts all properties onto the books. And then you go about the business of who is eligible to pay and who's not. Another thing we did was accurate and prompt billing. Okay, we noticed that this was a problem in the past in both Somalia and Afghanistan. Municipalities were waiting for potential taxpayers to come to the municipality to pay. We've started in both countries a procedure where, first of all, we make sure that the bills are accurate by getting accurate and reliable data through the survey and registration. Okay, and then number two, you promptly deliver the bills to the taxpayer. So you don't wait for them to come. You send the bills to them. Through this digital billing in both countries, we've been able to raise in Afghanistan, in additional municipal revenues, $35 million, which was a 27% increase since we started the project in 2016. Okay, so you see the digital bill at the top, and at the bottom you see a municipal staff actually delivering the bill to the property owner. We've managed to consistently bill 310,000 households. 310,000 households have actually paid tax, which is an 88% increase since before the project. So 88% more people are now paying their municipal charge simply because we've done digital billing and delivered the bills to the properties. We've also created one-stop shops. This goes to the idea of how easy it is to actually pay municipal charge. In the past, payers had to go to 7 places before they actually pay the municipal tax. We have developed one-stop shops where you go to one place and you go to only about 2 or 3 desks and you're out of there and you've paid your tax. So we've seen that this has been beneficial to the municipalities by increasing the percentage of municipal charges of the total OSR, total on-source revenue of each municipality, to 24% from 20%. We've also managed to, in both countries, make sure that banks are embedded within municipalities, because these charges are paid in banks, so you don't have to go out of the municipality to the bank. I'll move a bit fast here. We are not only interested in revenues, how much the revenues can increase, we are also interested in how they are spent. So we've started in this project in both countries, the idea of identification of priority projects, on which these funds that are collected should be spent. Okay, and we've increased compliance by making sure that residents' voices are heard in terms of where the money is spent. Just by doing that, we've increased compliance to 43% from 40%. You can see some of the projects which are identified and prioritized by community mechanisms. These are community groups that we help the municipalities to form. They prioritize themselves and they're included in the implementation. You can see the examples at the bottom. Just some lessons learned in land-based financing in fragile contexts. As I said, we've done this in Somalia and Afghanistan. Both are fragile contexts, a bit different from what you'd find in other more progressive countries. So we find that these lessons, we are learning them in both Somalia and Afghanistan. Okay, this is basically about improving service delivery. Also, political, administrative, and fiscal devolution is a big factor in how successful a land-based financing system works. In Afghanistan, for example, the mayors are appointed, not elected, and we see that their authority or autonomy is curtailed, and this has implications. So I'll stop there and just mention something very briefly in the last 2 minutes, which is what I see in terms of how SMEs and disruptive technologies find relevance in an area such as land-based financing. I'll give an example in Kenya of the Ushahidi startup, which started as an SME in 2008. Some of you might know about it. It has grown into a very big company now from a startup, and what they used what we call crowdsourcing to get information, spatial and other types of information, which then they use to approach government to demand better services. So it has been used for many purposes, this platform in Kenya and in more than 15 other countries now. And I find that it can find very good use also in demanding better services from local authorities. Also, in terms of the databases that can be created on the government side to improve services, I'll give the example of our own project. The database solution that we've created in Afghanistan to support land-based financing is a solution that uses a blockchain technology in one part of that solution, which we use to we anchor the blockchain to make sure that the signed certificates, these are land certificates for each property, cannot be forged. Okay, that they are authentic and they remain authentic, and we've used blockchain technology for that purpose. For payment, we've seen in many countries that have embraced e-government, that it lessens the transaction cost of the payers by using, for example, mobile payment, as we see in Kenya with M-Pesa. I shall stop there, and thank you, and back to Sina.
Thank you so much, Anthony, for your very rich presentation. Yeah, in fact, the land sector is important. It's the key sector of urban development, as land is the ground on which urban life, including building, transport, and mobility systems are built. Thanks a lot to all of you three speakers for your very rich and interesting presentations. And I think it's particularly interesting to see that the sectors cannot be seen separately from each other. They are in fact related. We cannot think about urban projects in the transport, building, energy, infrastructure sectors, etc., without addressing also the questions of sustainable finance mechanisms, which the last presentation was about. There is an increasing need to invest in urban infrastructure in sub-Saharan Africa. However, urban infrastructure developments cannot rely on external funding only, and yeah, we need finance mechanisms which are not just pockets of investment. So for coherent urban governance, national and local revenue collection mechanisms are needed. And here I think SMEs and tech companies can play important roles to develop tailor-made and fit-for-purpose tools to respond to local tax mechanisms as well. I think decentralization has also been a key word in all of the different presentations, but seen from different angles. There is a shift in the thinking from the political power and economic activities away from the center towards municipal and community levels. And the development also of solutions and approaches based on local knowledge and experience, of course. We have talked about economic and political ownership of national and local stakeholders who have in fact been mentioned as more sustainable ways to develop fit-for-purpose governance tools and also to reduce the reliance on only international forms of interventions. So the question which remains is, however, how to orchestrate also the interaction of different types of stakeholders acting on different levels, the international one, the national ones, the municipal and community levels. Also, are public-private partnerships an appropriate model to govern urban growth, and can other forms of governance be imagined, which are also the power balances and imbalances of the stakeholders. So to kick off the discussion, because we have a couple of minutes left, I would like to ask one question per speaker, starting with Teddy, then Hugo, and then Anthony. Anthony. So Teddy, my first question would be to see, I mean, if internet access is not guaranteed to all urban dwellers, for example, did you see in your findings whether limited access to internet can be an obstacle to the use of such e-taxi platforms? And how is this issue eventually addressed by public authorities which aim to enter into PPPs, private-public partnerships, with an e-hailing company? Then the question I would like to ask Hugo is, as the topic of the webinar is the role of new technologies and governance for sustainable urban growth, could we say that the development of decentralized solar systems market in urban areas is something desirable for the development of renewable energies in the region? And then my question for Anthony is, what could be the potential role of SMEs in developing mobile apps to collect land information, but also taxes? I mean, you addressed that issue a bit in your conclusion, but maybe can you develop a bit more on the potential contribution of these local companies? Thanks a lot, and I would give now the floor to Teddy, then Hugo and Anthony to reply to these questions.
Thank you, Sina. Do you hear me? Yes. Yes, so regarding the access to internet mobile for urban dwellers, what I would say is that in Kenya, the diffusion of the access of internet mobile is very good, and it was not necessarily a big issue for customers. Also because the ride-hailing companies are adapting to the local context, and for example, they are offering an hotline, telephone hotline, so you can order your taxi through a text message, or just to make a call. But I think in Douala, it's a bit different. I don't have any data regarding the users in Douala and the accessibility to internet in Douala. But what I know is that it's an issue for the users, but it's also an issue for the drivers. And for example, in Douala, the company, the ride-hailing companies, they are implementing, they are offering a data bundle to the drivers, and they're also implementing a stand in the street where the drivers, they can meet and they can load their phone, for example. So it's also electricity as a huge price, and even charging the telephone can be an issue. So yes, from the user part, I would say can say that. And from the more governance side, in the perspective of public-private partnership between a local government and a ride-hailing company, what we could think about is that maybe the idea is that to create public services on the territory, the local authorities could collaborate with the ride-hailing company in order to negotiate with, for example, information and communication companies like such Orange, or like all the internet provider, the mobile telephone provider, to give a free access or reduce prices to access to these services. For example, when you are in Kenya, when you buy a data bundle, you have free access to Facebook or to YouTube. You could imagine, for example, that you have a free access to one of the apps, for example, Safe Boda or Uber, or the one which is chosen by the call for tenders. So yeah, you could find, you have to create a coherent system and a global system with all the stakeholders that are involved, that could be involved in the process.
Thanks, Teddy, for your answer. Over to you, Hugo.
Yes. How do I put? There we go. Thank you very much for your questions. Now, I think these trends will probably tend to slow down the development of the centralized renewable capacities in the network, as it's again linked directly to the financial viability of electricity utilities. For example, if you want to have renewable projects to be financed on very favorable terms, you need to have payment certainty, which is required over all your power plant's lifetime. So sometimes more than 25 years. as like renewable plants at the contrary of fossil fuel plants have a very large capex and very low opex. So almost all the cost of the power plants is at T0 at the beginning of the exploitation. So such a time horizon involves many risks, and those risks are even higher when you have your national purchasing companies that face a major financial problem, as it can threaten the stability of cash flows. And therefore, if the financial difficulties of the sector increases, notably if the lucrative consumers are moving away from the network, as we saw, for example, with solar panels and our study using satellite imagery, there is a significant risk that the share of renewables will remain minimal in some countries, or at least centralized renewable. And for example, in many countries where the sector's finances are in a very dire situation, a dire financial situation, you have this kind of emergency power plants that tend to thrive. And these power plants are usually powered by heavy fuel oil and are leased at great expenses from specialized companies. And the only advantage that these power plants have is that they can be installed without any significant counterparts by national utilities, unlike renewable power plants. However, these emergency power plants are particularly expensive, and the electricity costs can be 2 to 3 times higher than the conventional power plants. And so they are anchoring even more the sector in the vicious circles that I presented above. On the other side, though, I mean, when you have more decentralized solar in the cities, it also means that you have more solar in your electricity mix, And the advantage of these decentralized systems is that they produce electricity exactly where electricity is consumed, because they are produced residentially or by companies that just consume it directly on locally. And so you don't need this kind of heavy transmission lines and distribution lines where you can then have you need maintenance to avoid line losses, etc. So it also means a greener mix on the other side. And for example, in Nigeria, where the quality of service supply of electricity supply is literally catastrophic, you have a new market emerging, especially for SMEs and small industries, where you have basically these kind of new companies that are renting hybrid power plants. So it's a diesel generator that is linked to a solar panels and with battery storage systems, and that work as a reliability provider. So the company can be connected to the network, and when the voltage drops or you have a power cut, then the solar panels takes over and provide electricity to the company for its productive uses. Back to you, Sina.
Thanks, Hugo, for this complementary info. Anthony, about SMEs. Thanks.
Yeah, okay. So I'll look at this by looking at the social contract. There are 2 sides of the social contract. So one side is from government and the other one is the paying public. Okay. So I've already mentioned there's a role for SMEs. I gave the example of the Ushahidi company that started as a small company in 2008. I see a company like Ushahidi coming on the social contract side of the paying public, supporting them to put together a social audit, if you like, auditing the authorities on the level of services that they're getting in their communities. Also, Ushahidi and others, there are many others that have come up in the last few years, apps that are used for community mobilization, okay, to get evidence with which they can confront governments at both levels to make sure that services are improved. But also on the other side of the social contract, on the government side, I'll give an example of what's happening in Kenya right now. Many counties in Kenya under a World Bank project are now giving SMEs contracts to develop systems that collect building and rental information for purposes of the rental tax in Kenya, which has been applied in the last few years in Kenya. So government is actually getting these private companies to collect that information for purposes of rental tax in many of the counties in Kenya. So there's definitely a big role on both sides of the social contract for private companies, SMEs, for land information and also to agitate for community mobilization. Back to you.
Thank you, Anthony. We're coming towards the end of the session, but we have questions in the Q&A box. So by the way, if other participants want to ask further questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box. So there are two colleagues from Bordeaux and from Nairobi, as I see, asking questions. Luke Yaoui, who is interested in the Cameroon case. This is a question for Teddy, and he asks how you explain the absence of transnational ride-hailing companies in Cameroon. And maybe I can add to this question for Teddy, another one asked by my colleague Dennis Mbugua from Nairobi. Hi to you. He is wondering if the arbitrary arrests by police, for example, in Nairobi, has an impact on drivers, and how is this threat actually being taken in charge by public authorities and by stakeholders who make these projects and the PPPs work. Thanks for your questions to Teddy. And then another question then for Anthony in the same round, which is about informal taxes and how informal taxes are or are not taken in consideration when setting up the taxation systems. Anthony, over to you, Teddy.
Thank you for your two questions. Yes, these two questions are quite related because in Douala, the motor taxi sector is huge and very important and is well structured. But even if it's informal, you have this kind of cartel system and this organization, like in like very local organization with drivers who are in what we call camp or stand. You had, for example, an international company in Douala. It was Itch. It's a French operating. It's a French ride-hailing company, but it is operating in UK, in Belgium, in Switzerland, and in many countries in Africa. And they left the country 1 year ago. I'm not sure exactly why, but it's notably because they had some issue with the existing informal organization, the association, of motor taxi drivers, and it was sometimes violent, and the driver were harassed by the driver who are not working for them. So sometimes you have this kind of issue, and it can also impact the customers, of course, because if you have the driver attacked by other drivers who are not working for the ride-hailing company, the user, the customer is also in danger. And it is directly linked also to the corruption and the police. For example, in Kenya, you have a lot of policemen who owns matatu and a taxi, and they are sometimes harassing other matatu and other taxi because they are not competing with their own taxi. So they take advantage of their position to for example, they open the traffic when their own matatu arrived or their own taxi, and they close the street, and they are arrested. They stop the other matatu in order to disadvantage them. And this kind of situation might happen also in Nairobi. So this is a very complicated question, and it is not directly. I didn't work directly on this topic. But I think corruption is one of the main issue to implement this kind of public-private partnership and develop this, this PPP.
Thank you, Teddy. Maybe we can move on to Anthony if he's with us. We've overstretched already a bit of the time. So if you can reply very quickly and then we can conclude the session. Thanks, Anthony.
Yeah, that's a good question from Dennis Mbogwa. I'll give one example from Kenya and one example from where I'm working right now in Afghanistan, Kabul. But of course, obviously, you find similar things in Africa. So the Karen and Langata District Association, as I've said, collects, I don't know what your view of informal tax means, but I'll give you an example of Karengata, which collects tax informally. So it's an association collecting the tax, not the government. And it only remits this tax to the government when services are provided. So they went to court and they won a case and they collect informally by themselves, the association, and only remits to government when the services are provided. I'll give another example from one neighborhood in Afghanistan, in Kabul, where there are 3 communities in Kabul, in the city of Kabul, which told the municipality that they do not want the services from the municipality. So they collect the taxes informally through their community mechanism, and they subcontract companies to deliver the services. So they collect the taxes and the services are delivered not by the municipality, but by private companies. So both are examples of informal tax collection. In one case in Kenya, the collections actually remitted when services are provided, and in another one, they source their own services by themselves. So I'm sure there are hundreds of other cases like this in other countries in Africa. Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony. Multitasking. Yeah, so thanks a lot for the speakers for your contributions and for all the participants for their patience, although we have overstretched the time a bit already. What is sure is that urban governance will remain a major challenge, but also an opportunity for the development of the continent. But it is key to identify local innovations and approaches, and also to involve local stakeholders, such as SMEs, community-based organizations, international expertise, and organizations of the diaspora into urban governance. More research is needed, both in qualitative and quantitative forms. If you are interested in the research that Ifri and especially the Energy and Climate and Sub-Saharan Africa centers are doing, please feel free to consult our internet webpage. We've done some research on different policy sectors in cities in the past. And also on the big question of middle classes in Africa. Yeah, and if you are more interested in the activities to come, feel also free to send me an email. Some of you, we might be seeing you at the Montpellier Summit on Africa France Summit next week. Until then, thanks again. Stay safe. Bye-bye.